If everyone could just have a seat, we're going to begin the panel. My name is Lisa Jeremiah, and I am part of the subcommittee who planned this panel with the other committee members. I would like to thank my other subcommittee members for all of their hard work and diligence. And it is an honor to be asked to introduce the moderator of our panel. On January 11th, 2021, Justice Long was appointed Associate Justice on the Rhode Island Supreme Court. Justice Long is the first Black justice appointed to the Supreme Court of Rhode Island and actually shifted the majority to a woman Supreme Court bar, which was a major change. Justice Long chairs the Rhode Island Committee on Racial and Ethnic Fairness in the courts, and she also serves as an advisory board member on the National Consortium of Racial and Ethnic Fairness in the court. Justice Long, we thank you for agreeing to moderate this panel. You are indeed a trailblazer for a lot of people, and I will turn the panel over to you.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction, and many thanks also to the subcommittee and the full committee members for inviting me to be a part of this amazing conference, and of course for doing all of the really hard work that went into making this successful. So good morning all and welcome. I think that I speak for all of us up here on the panel when I say that we are really delighted to be here with you and that you are joining us for our discussion of diversity in the workplace, including law firms. We are here this morning with two objectives in mind. First, to engage in a continuing conversation on the importance of workplace diversity. And secondly, and I think more critically, to discuss practical strategies for achieving and sustaining meaningful diversity throughout the ranks of an organization. I'll begin by introducing our impressive panelists who have been engaged in diversity work in government, law firms, and academia for their whole careers. Many of you are, of course, familiar with Rhode Island District Court Associate Judge Bill Trezvant. After graduating from the University of Rhode Island and the Marshall Wythe School of Law at the College of William and Mary, Judge Trezvant returned to his native Rhode Island and worked for almost 2 decades as a special assistant in the Department of the Attorney General. Sworn in earlier this year, Judge Trezvant is one of 5 Black judges currently serving in the Rhode Island judiciary. He is also president of the Thurgood Marshall Law Society, which promotes collaboration and networking among Rhode Island attorneys. Some of you may also be familiar with Ms. Tobey Daluz, an attorney, native Rhode Islander, and granddaughter of Cape Verdean immigrants. Ms. Daluz grew up on the east side of Providence and graduated from the Wheeler School. From there, she went on to the University of Pennsylvania, where she completed her undergraduate studies and received her Juris Doctorate from Georgetown Law Center. Throughout her career, Ms. Daluz has actively participated in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, both in her law firms and within the legal profession. She has led Ballard Spahr in the navigation and growth of its diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative for nearly 20 years, and she has served as a board member for outside organizations like the Delaware Bar Association's Minority Job Fair, the American Bankruptcy Institute, the International Women's Restructuring Confederation, and the Philadelphia Diversity Law Group. I'm also pleased to introduce Professor Stefanie Johnson, who joins us from Rice University, where she is the director of the Anne and John Doerr Institute for New Leaders. Dr. Johnson received her bachelor's degree from Claremont McKenna College and earned her master's and PhD in industrial organizational psychology from Rice University. Her teaching, service, and research all focus on the intersection of leadership and DEI. She is a fellow in the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychologists and the American Psychological Society. Dr. Johnson has published widely in top academic journals and has received $3.8 million in grant funding from organizations such as the CDC, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the Army Research Institute, and NASA. She also brings her rigorous academic research into the public sphere. She has appeared on Fox, ABC, NBC, and CNN, and has written for popular press outlets such as Forbes, Bloomberg, and the Harvard Business Review, including, for example, an intriguing article from 2016 about how women and minorities are viewed within their organizations for promoting diversity. A quick word about titles and name prefixes. I'm being very intentional about using Judge, Ms., and Doctor and/or Professor. A couple of months ago, I read about a 2017 study that appeared in the Journal of Women's Health. The study concluded that differential formality in speaker introductions may amplify isolation, marginalization, and professional discomfiture expressed by women faculty in academic medicine. Now, there may be research that reaches different conclusions for settings such as this, but I'm gonna err on the side of caution and be very respectful of our panelists' amazing accomplishments. So, with that, I'm gonna sit down and we're gonna have a conversation. So I'm looking forward to your input at some point during this, but I have lots of questions that I wanna ask our panelists and look forward to a great discussion. I thought I planned everything. All right. So, given your fantastic bios, can you still hear me? Yes. Okay. It's fair to say that each of you have engaged in a lot of conversations about the importance of workplace diversity over the course of your careers. I'd like to start by asking you to go back to the beginning of your career and tell all of us here how and why you became dedicated to this work. I'm going to start with you, Judge Trezvant.
Thank you, Justice Long. I appreciate all the work you do and can't tell you how humbled I am to be here on a panel with you. My first thought of becoming a judge and becoming a member of the Attorney General's office goes back many, many years. I had my father was president of the NAACP chapter in Newport, and I got to observe him interact with so many individuals, and especially local civil rights attorneys who we recognized. One of them was Walter Stone. The other was, I call him Old Man Houlihan, who was Judge Houlihan's father. And they were strong advocates for the underprivileged, the working class, and minorities. And they especially looked out for people that may have gotten a raw deal. And I was motivated to help people. That's been my motivation for these many, many years. And I remember sitting down and having these choices. I came back to Rhode Island, and I sat down with Judge Clifton, Edward Clifton, who was a Superior Court judge, who is one of the most gracious. He was very gracious with his time, and we talk about allies. He was an ally of mine, and he suggested, you know, I think your personality would work very well with the Attorney General's office. And he said, I'm going to write you a letter for you. And through his guidance and his encouragement, I applied for the Rhode Island Attorney General's office, and I ended up there. And much of my career, I've been an ambassador, both to the minority community and back to the Office of Attorney General and law enforcement in general. And I can say it's been a great ride, and I've enjoyed doing those roles. And I think it's important for me to give back to people. So for me, that's been my motivation, to really help people and to be like the folks that I saw, and I owe a debt of gratitude to Judge Walter Stone and to, I call him Old Man Houlihan, because in Newport, we always knew him as Old Man Houlihan.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you. Attorney Daluz, can you tell me about why?
I certainly can. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be home. I think this is the first time I have been here for professional reasons, probably in my entire, since I was a summer associate, let me say that. And thank you for welcoming me here so warmly. So I think my pathway seems to me to be unique. In comparison to so many of the people who I've met today, I've been in a large law firm for 32 years. I haven't done anything else. I was a summer associate at a firm in Providence here, and then I was a summer associate at a firm in Philadelphia, and then since then I've been a corporate bankruptcy attorney. So I'd say there's two primary reasons that I became involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And they may qualify as countervailing factors, if you hear me for a minute, if you hear me out. First, I think I was about a 6th or 7th year associate when diversity committees showed up in law firms. I got a call from the chair of my firm at the time. I wasn't at Ballard's Bar. And he said, "Tobey, we're putting together a diversity committee. Will you serve?" So what do you say to the managing partner of your firm who calls you when you're up for partner the next year? You go, "Yes." And then you turn to the internet and you say, "I don't know how to do that. I don't know that language. I'm a trained bankruptcy attorney. And because I am black, he is calling me to ask me if I'll serve on the diversity committee." And I was like, "What's the language? What are the primary points?" And I had to be a quick study. There was no way I was saying no, right? But that's one of the reasons, because at that time there was an expectation, and it turned out it ended up that most diversity committees were made up of the diverse lawyers in the law firms, and it was expected that we were going to carry the water. At the same time, I will tell you, my answer would have never been no, because if not me, who? I had an obligation to share my story, to share the hurdles I'd faced and how I thought I cleared them. I had an obligation to reach back and help those who were junior to me, and frankly, to teach and inform those who were senior to me. I had some amazing sponsors and mentors in my life, and at that point, and it might not surprise you, as a corporate bankruptcy attorney, they were white men. And I wanted to thank those for what they did right, and teach those who could have done more. And so I'd say, those two things, push and pull. I did it because it was expected of me, and I did it because it had to be me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Professor Johnson, you've dedicated your academic career to these issues, and I'd like to know why.
Yes, thank you for the question. I love hearing these stories. It's such a great way to start the conversation. So truth be told, I did a research study when I was a college student on stereotype threat of women leaders. And it was great. We actually published the study, which is pretty cool for a college student. But then when I went to a PhD program, I actually stopped doing research on diversity, because I figured I am a Mexican-American first-generation college student, woman. If I study diversity as my research topic, no one's going to take me seriously. And I'm super ashamed to say that out loud, but it is truth. And Justice Long, you mentioned the study in 2016 on when women and people of color support diversity, they're viewed negatively for that. And I think that was kind of the beginnings of those thoughts, was a fear of, if this is what I do, people will perceive it as self-serving, or think that I'm not as serious of a scholar as others, right? Because I feel like I'm already starting from a deficit in that regard. So I went on to study leadership, which is like super masculine, mainstream topic. And despite my best efforts, every study I did showed discrimination and bias against women leaders, against leaders of color, often who had higher performance evaluations, higher customer satisfaction, brought in more money, and yet didn't get promoted into the leadership ranks, didn't make partner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And despite my attempt to not address these issues, I also am just like, I'm a good scholar, right? You can't publish data that show that there's different effects for men and women and not share that information. So I ended up, nonetheless, despite my best efforts, studying this topic, although I will still admit I didn't really talk about it very publicly until after I had tenure. And then I'm like, oh, haha, now you can't. Now you can't get rid of me. And it turns out to be the most interesting and probably most important work that I feel like I've done. And, you know, if not me, then who, right? As you said.
Fantastic. Love that. And so appreciate your sharing your, I mean, really, I think it's a vulnerable question, and I really appreciate your sharing that with us. So I started out by saying that we're having a continuing conversation, and it's obvious from everything that we've heard about your own personal journeys that these are not new conversations. And as our wonderful Chief Judge McConnell pointed out in the opening remarks, this is really, you know, we're back to this, right? This is something that is not new. And I love to point out, because in some ways I think there's this idea that George Floyd is what changed the world, but we know, those of us who have been involved in this work know that George Floyd was just another moment in our country's history. And I think it's such a timely thing to look back and see an op-ed that President Ford wrote on August 8th, 1999 for the New York Times called "Inclusive America Under Attack." He was addressing the fact that his alma mater was being sued at that time for its affirmative action programs, and spoke really movingly about why he believed that it was so important for universities to be able to consider these factors, that race and ethnicity and background and socioeconomic status are all important elements among others. We won't get into that conversation today, but I raise that as a way to frame the fact that even then, in 1999, in his op-ed, he notes that already the global economy requires unprecedented grasp of diverse viewpoints and cultural traditions. So we know that even President Ford, 23 years ago, knew that there was a business case, if nothing else, for diversity. And it's not a new idea. We know that strong economies rely on diverse workforces, but let's just establish the baseline. And Judge Trezvant, I know that you in particular are sort of interested in this, the fact that the data tell this story about the strong business case. What is the business case for diverse workplaces?
So there's been a number of studies done over the last 15 to 20 years that really show that there's a case for diversity in workplace and that it benefits businesses. It's been very clear through that. There was a study done by the McKinley Foundation and as well as the World Economic Forum. And they did these studies, and I'll just highlight a few points. The companies with above average diversity scores in terms of, again, age, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and cultural background, as well as other factors, those companies that had above average diversity scores had better revenue numbers. And they tried to drill down on why that was. And they came up with some common themes through all these different studies. The first point that they made is that diverse teams boost creativity and innovation. That was the first point that was generally made throughout all of these studies. They indicated that having key members of your decision-making team having a diverse background helped in creativity and innovation. The second point that many of these studies also point to is that employees who were from a diverse background became ambassadors for the company, and that they were able to access different markets. That was an important point in all of these studies, that this increased it. And there was a famous act by Allstate Insurance, and I'll just give you that as one example. They hired a number of African-American salespeople in their insurance force. They were able to go into Chicago and become the #1 insurance business in Chicago because they hired what essentially was the marketplace. They established this point. And the other point that is throughout the research that sort of points to a clear benefit of having a diverse workforce, and I think it bodes well in the law firms, is that there was better decision making. And that having a diverse team allowed decision makers to consider different viewpoints, different cultural realities. And these were some of the key points, as well as developing new skills, introducing cultural benefits, and this as well as a changing demographics throughout our country have become real key points that businesses have really launched into, and businesses that are successful in doing this have in fact impacted their bottom line.
So, Ms. Daluz, from the law firm perspective, do you think that's borne out? Is there any reason why that data wouldn't also apply to law firms? And does it apply to law firms in Philadelphia and Wilmington, where you have experience?
Well, and my experience is a large law firm experience, so I don't want to suggest that every law firm, especially women and minority-owned law firms, are of this model. But business case. The business case comes about for corporations and insurance companies, often because of societal pressures, business strategy, shareholder pressure even nowadays. Law firms are privately held and answer to nobody but their clients. It was the clients that pulled law firms into the business case, that made them realize that we believe we're better represented if you give us a diverse team. And law firms came along begrudgingly. And even now, there are a number of ways that people provide a diverse team for an interview and then maybe don't put those diverse lawyers on the matter. There are always questions about who gets credit for originating the work, what partners get credit for spearheading the work, and all of those things impact whether or not a law firm is truly providing a diverse team for its clients. But I think one of the missteps that I remember making when I didn't know anything about diversity, equity, and inclusion was in my first meeting, and I said, "But isn't it the right thing to do?" And the partner sitting next to me, I thought she was going to blow my head off. She was like, "You don't say that." It's always the business case. I will say that we have come full circle. I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion in law firms and in the business world and in in-house legal departments now, since the murder of George Floyd, really encompasses both initiatives. Yes, it's absolutely critical and necessary for business, but I think now we're also realizing that it's okay to say it's the right thing to do.
That's great. So I think that leads me back to Professor Johnson's 2016 study and what she shared about really her own journey about, can I be interested in this topic? Is it okay for women and minorities to promote diversity? And Professor Johnson, I'll let you talk to us a little bit about that study and what you think the difference might be between 2016 and now.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I want to redo that study because the data were, they're older now. Like a lot has changed, and I wonder if it would hold up because because of the focus of corporations on diversity and inclusion.
Can I interrupt you for just one
Yeah.
second and give you a quote from your
Sure.
article?
Oh, yeah.
For all the talk about how important diversity is within organizations, white and male executives aren't rewarded career-wise for engaging in diversity-valuing behavior, and non-white and female executives actually get punished for it. So that's the frame. So with that,
Yeah, bummer, right? I think people are getting rewarded now. There's organizations are paying people for participating in employee resource groups, giving them compensation. It's being considered in promotion decisions. So, I'd like to think the tide has turned in some organizations some of the time. I don't know that it's, totally reversed, but I think things are different. Because of this business case, it's been articulated so well over the last 5 to 7 years, because of the social pressure of shareholders, because of the pressure, and I really like that you mentioned this, Attorney Daluz, what clients want. I heard this anecdote, and it was about an accounting firm, not a law firm, but they went in to pitch a client, and I understand that the plural of anecdote is not data, so take this for what it's worth. But they went in to pitch a client, and it happened to be a client in Asia. They sent in their team. Everyone on the team was white. And they walked in, they sat down, and the client said, "We're going to end the meeting now. We'd like you to send in your A team next time." And they said, "What?" And they said, "We don't believe that the best people in your whole firm are all white. And if you send in all white people, you're clearly not sending us your best talent." They turned around and brought in a more diverse team so quickly. I'll point out that I worked with this organization because they had a lack of diversity in the partner ranks. That's why I had come in. So they probably sent in a bunch of partners, but I think that was a huge wake-up call for them. To be asked to leave a meeting and come back with your A team, I just feel like I think there's a big shift. I mean, those same corporations are also under pressure from their shareholders. So even if you're a privately held company, like a law firm, to utilize diverse suppliers, this is a supplier issue, right? So I feel like I have to hope things are changing. It's not perfect, but if you look at, I studied this stuff, right? So before the murder of George Floyd, how many companies had specific, measurable, numeric goals for diversity and inclusion? It was in the Fortune 500, it was like fewer than 15% that had publicly stated them. They might internally hold them, but it was like, they're not going to tell people. Now it's closer to 40%. That's a really big shift. If you look at the number of companies with Black board members, that's increased. In the year following George Floyd's death, the number of Black board members who were appointed to the Fortune 500 was as many as 5 years before George Floyd. So it's 5 times the average. I feel like it has to be changing, and we have so far to go.
Can I follow up on
yeah, I
something
was
that-
actually going to turn to you, but I will just
Great.
say, if I may, that was
Yeah.
a great anecdote. So,
Thanks.
It is a great anecdote.
Ms. Daluz.
This concept of rewards, identifying kind of whether you're providing diverse teams or not, and really recognizing those who are doing the hard work within organizations around diversity, equity, and inclusion for the good of the entire organization, and having that get recognized is something that law firms are only now getting to. You probably read about them the same way I do on Above the Law, like what's the new firm that's giving billable hour credit for doing DEI work. That's certainly one example. And bonuses as well. But one of the unique things that I've seen very recently is a major, one of the top 5 clients of my firm, who gets negotiated rates, as they always do, agreed that to the extent at the end of the year, our diversity statistics show that we meet a certain percentage of diverse attorneys working on their matters, that we get back the discount and they pay it to us as a bonus. there are ways now that companies who are serious about diversity can ensure that their law firms are going about it the right way.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, well, nothing speaks to a partnership like money.
Well, and I think there's a lot in all of these concepts that, this idea of data and statistics, and I'd really like to peel back and get there, but I still, before we do that, I want to get a little bit to this theme that Judge Trezvant touched on in his opening remarks, and that is about mentors, and Attorney Daluz, you talked about sponsors, but this idea of building and maintaining these strong pipelines has been something that has been out there for a long time, and I like to make a nice connection between our own Richard Rose, who many of you know. He has that Third Circuit connection. He interned for Judge Higginbotham, and when Judge Higginbotham passed away, he wrote a wonderful law review article about him and talked about just the many ways that Judge Higginbotham contributed to our legal knowledge generally, but this particular quote: "For all of Higginbotham's achievements as a judge and scholar, his greatest contribution was as a mentor and friend. Many of his former law clerks have gone on to distinguish themselves in their own right. These lawyers include the Honorable Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, the Honorable Edward S. G. Dennis, Jr., former United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania and Assistant Attorney General, Criminal Division, United States Department of Justice, Professor Ronald K. Noble, New York University School of Law, former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Enforcement, United States Department of Treasury, Gilbert Casellas, General Counsel of the United States Air Force, and Philadelphia City Solicitor Stefanie Franklin Super. Their relationship with Judge Higginbotham no doubt nurtured their success. I know this nurturing has contributed to my own modest success." So I love that, partly because I think that Richard Rose would get a big kick out of the fact that I pulled his law review article and cited from it, but also because I do think that that's something that many of us up here on this stage recognize is so important: mentors, sponsors, people who are helping to build that pipeline. And I think the question that comes to me is that mentors are mentoring. They have been mentoring. They've been trying to do this. Clearly, Judge Higginbotham was out there long ago doing this. But we have here in Rhode Island, Roger Williams Law School is engaging the community, connecting its students. It adopts people who didn't go to Roger Williams as sort of, part of their family. The Roger Williams is great about placing students for internships and other opportunities. Thurgood Marshall Law Society sends notices of job vacancies around. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson worked in Providence, Rhode Island 20 years ago. So, and thank you, Judge Celia, right? Why aren't we seeing more? So we know the mentoring is going on. Any thoughts, and maybe this is best for you, Judge Trezvant, any thoughts about why we aren't seeing more success here? I mean, I give credit to those in the room, but it seems like if Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was in Providence 20 years ago, we should be seeing more. Thoughts?
So that's an interesting question. I think it's about sustained effort. It's about purpose, and it's about having an individual that cares about what their job is and recognizing that they need ambassadors, and they recognize that we're not going to be here all the time, that we have to have successors. So I think that thought process of identifying successors is a broad part of that. I can remember going into the office of the Deputy Attorney General, Jerry Coyne, who was a Deputy Attorney General, and he said, "We've had our eye on you, and you interviewed very well. We want you to be part of our team. But you know what? I developed a relationship with Jerry that I could have a meaningful relationship with him and go to him and talk about issues and talk about my career path and talk about issues out in the community. And he also engaged me purposely and realized that he needed to hear that other voice. He needed to hear what was going on in the minority community, and he was an engagement process. And Jerry was an advocate, and he also was very mindful that in systems that we have, very often that folks of color weren't part of those systems. And he used what I call unorthodox methodology in trying to engage the community and bring new talent to the AG's office. And he was very purposeful for that. And I've engaged in that process, and I found that to be very rewarding. And I found that having that consistent voice in the office at a high enough level where we could bring a candidate, identify somebody, they could get an interview, was a marked difference between that institution as opposed to some other state agency that sort of sat on their hands and waited. You had to have someone in the office that was active and thinking, we really need that. And it provided a forum where we could bring those voices to the table. And it showed its value several years later when we had an issue with the minority community, and I brought minority pastors to the table for the Attorney General, new Attorney General, to meet with those folks, and it made a big impact on our work. I think that's a real part of what our role is, and it's an important part. And I think it really starts with that seed of recognizing we're not always going to be in the places we are, and we have to identify people who are going to take our place.
So, Attorney Daluz, I'm going to turn to you because I did a little sneaking around on your bio and some of the work you're involved in, and the Philadelphia Diversity Law Group strikes me as one of these models for identifying successors. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that here for our audience, for those who might not have been cyber stalking her before today.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. But I would like to just comment briefly on your quote about Judge Higginbotham, which kind of blew my mind. We will be having a breakfast for him next week to raise funds for a mural in his honor in Philadelphia. And so, but when you read the list of people who he mentored, there were at least 2 additional people who mentored me on that list. And I, first of all, I was honored to have Judge Higginbotham as a professor when I was undergrad at Penn. He taught the undergrads, not just the law students. And he was so kind and so approachable, which you'd never imagine from a circuit court judge. He was all those things.
Except for ours. Judge Montalcalvo is in the room.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
But Eleanor Holmes Norton was a professor of mine at Georgetown, and then a friend as she moved into her political career. And Stephanie Franklin Suber is my partner, and was the kind of the elder statesman among Black female partners, and one of the first I'd ever seen when I got to Ballard. And so it's what I've learned from her is immeasurable. And so I just had to kind of throw that out there. I can't believe how impactful that quote is for me. But the Philadelphia Diversity Law Group is an attempt by the legal community, both in law firms in Philadelphia and in in-house legal departments, to diversify the legal industry in Philadelphia. It has at least one representative from every major firm in every law department in Philadelphia. And they have a program. It started with just kind of around recruiting. And the program was to have a 1L summer associate who would come in, and everybody would have a kind of opportunity to interview certain people, and they'd kind of pull out of a hat as to where these super qualified first-year law students would go to work, and they could get an offer from either an in-house legal department or a law firm. The idea was, in Philadelphia, it's no different than most cities, other than, I'd say, New York, DC, or LA, or Chicago, who say over and over again, but the diverse students don't want to come here. They don't come here. They go to New York. They go to Boston. I mean, how many times have we heard that? So get them sooner. Find them when they're a 1L. Encourage them to come and have an opportunity. And so many of them are like, we get to work for an in-house legal department. How many people have the opportunity to see that? And so it started, summer associate recruiting. It's been going on now for 20 years at least, and there are over 2,000 alumni of PDLG. Not all in Philadelphia law firms, not all in Philadelphia in-house legal departments, but all who credit PDLG with a stepping stone in their career. So it moved from just a recruiting exercise to one of inclusion, and we started to put together programs to help people learn how to succeed in their first legal job, whether it's a big firm, whether it's in-house. For those of us who are first, second generation, maybe we don't have role models in our life, like Judge Trezvant here did, who are able to tell us what the corporate environment is like, and what you do and what you don't do, and to show up and to lean in and to participate in the social activities. All kinds of programs to help the young lawyers succeed in their first jobs. And beyond now inclusion, it's focused on the alumni and bringing the alumni back to mentor the students who are now involved in PDLG, having programs where you can hear a diverse number of professional pathways. There are many ways to succeed as a lawyer. I didn't know. I went to 3 firms. I've only had 3 jobs in 32 years. There's so many other paths. And to be able to hear those stories from people that look like you is immensely powerful. They become the mentors for the next generation. And I think it doesn't start once you start working. I think we all become mentors. We're a mentor at the beginning of our career. As undergrads, we mentor those in high school or in elementary school. As we move on to law school, we reach back to undergrad. And the same happens through our entire career. So if you think you're not a mentor now, you either are a mentor or you should be.
Excellent point. Thank you. So, Professor Johnson, I'm going to turn to you now because we're on this theme of pipelines and reaching back and being a mentor. And there's again, on the theme of these are continuing conversations, long before your article in the Harvard Business Review in March, April 1990, there was an article by R. Roosevelt Thomas Jr., who was formerly an assistant professor at Harvard Business School and executive director of the American Institute for Managing Diversity, Inc. at Morehouse College. He wrote about From Affirmative Action to Affirming Diversity, again, back in 1990. But he talked about the potential pitfalls of focus on the pipeline perspective, and I think Attorney Daluz gets to this a little bit about some of these other things. But he talked about this focus on the pipeline. His quote was, "It generates a self-perpetuating, self-defeating, recruitment-oriented cycle with 6 stages." And he went through them. Problem recognition, oh, we need more diversity. Intervention, let's go out and get ourselves some diverse people. Great expectations, we've got them, they're gonna do a great job, we're gonna change everything. Then there's this frustration and what he called premature plateauing. And then dormancy. You have from the plateauing, people leaving the firm and finding other opportunities, and those who remain present a silent front to the outside world. And then there's another crisis. There's competitive pressure, government intervention, maybe a lawsuit, external pressure that leads again to this problem recognition. And so I'm curious about your thoughts on pipeline, how maybe if we recognize that as a solution, what can we do to make sure that we build it in a productive and strong way?
Yeah, I love that question. I love that article. The problem with the pipeline is it leaks, right? So, in fact, with that same accounting firm that I worked with, we created this really cool graphic that showed the amount of diversity they were bringing in at the bottom. It was really diverse. And they were really proud of it, right? Like, they're incoming folks. But then when you get to the top, you see attrition, a lot of people quitting. You see people not getting partner, and so they leave. You see people plateauing, not getting promoted, and so the top continues to look the same. And that, to me, that's the problem with the pipeline issue. It's actually, recruiting's pretty easy, less easy the last couple years, if anyone's had to hire. It's not easy, but like from a business view, finding great diverse talent out there, it's actually not that hard, but keeping that talent there, developing that talent, recognizing their outstanding performance, not giving different criteria or requirements for different people to make it to the top, that's actually really hard because that requires you to change your internal structures and people. Just like going outside and finding people and wooing them in, it's like you don't actually have to do any work on the inside of the organization. And so I think that's why it's attractive to companies, right? Like, we don't have to look at ourselves in the mirror. We can just keep adding people in at the bottom and pat ourselves in the back. But it's like the processes of, I think of, I worked with a law firm, and they had a gender issue. Maybe this is pervasive, I think. And one of the leading partner, the head partner, said, "I have no bias against women. Give me any woman who can bill 80 hours a week, I will make her a partner." And I was like, is that even possible? Like, I'm literally doing the math, like, because I don't work 80 hours a week. That's like a lot and that's billable hours, right? And it's assuming they're not getting credit for their DEI work either, because I know this firm is not giving credit for their DEI work. So, like, stuff like that, like, maybe that's seen as fair. Everyone has to bill 80, but it's really not equitable.
It's not true either.
And it's not true, yeah. I know how, like, you sit on the plane and you're billing one person for the flight and you're doing someone else's work so you can add in those hours, but yeah, there's other issues that are central to this concern. Like, for one thing, you're just never gonna be able to fill the partner ranks with Gen Z. I don't know if any of y'all are Gen Z or millennials. They're just like, no. We're like, we're not gonna do it. And there's like a lack of, in accounting too, people who really wanna do that. Like, why would I wanna invest my money in this company? What have you invested in me? And so I feel like it's gonna be problematic to fill those roles with any humans, but really doing that work to make the workplace work for everyone, that's like my view, is hard, but it has such better outcomes, because if you're retaining, you might think, oh, we're gonna work hard to retain our female talent or our women of color or people of color, but you actually just see like everyone's retention goes up, and I can really quickly bust out an ROI on that investment, and it's huge. Like, not losing great talent pays tons of dividends. We can add that to the judge's list of the business case for diversity. Is like, good employment practices for diversity and inclusion are good employment practices. And so I think that's really where the goal should be, is not just like, let's see how many people we can bring in, but measuring success as to how many of these people can we retain, promote, and make our future leaders of the organization.
I just wanted to add a law firm perspective again too. Frankly, to the extent that law firms continue to try to promote based on a traditional model of hiring either first years or junior associates and hoping they will stay and be promoted to partner, then the law firms will never be diverse. And our firm has been challenged, and we've thought about other ways to diversify, not just the associate ranks, which is terrific, and we have accomplished a lot among the associate ranks. But how do you diversify the partner ranks if the pipeline is leaking? I like that term. And it is that you have to go about finding potential partners a different way. You've got to start doing things differently. And until law firms are committed to moving outside of their comfort zone, to finding amazing former AUSAs or attorneys general, or and really helping them build a successful practice, not just bringing them in for the sake of having them in, but having them make sense. If you have a strong white-collar practice, you can bring in someone who has no book of business and help them build a book of business and make a committed, loyal, long-term partner of color. It just takes a different approach. It has to make sense from a business perspective, but it takes a different approach. So I would say that, you know, until law firms are really committed to doing that, they'll see the same outcome.
Yeah, please.
I can add to that. I think that's an excellent example because in many states we see that model where, you know, you didn't get into the law firm right out of law school, but you ended up doing 100, you know, jury trials, and then you were running the appellate unit in the AG's office, and then, you know, you're talking to all the Supreme Court judges, you're talking to the federal judges. Law firms are happy to scoop that particular person up and bring that and help develop that person's book of business. That's an excellent example. I worked for a firm where that was done on a regular basis, that they were able to identify people that had done a litigation work, and you know, they worked for the AG's office for 10 or 12 years, and then they got cross-designated as a temporary special assistant federal prosecutor. So when their resume, when they wanted to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then several years later they went and they did white-collar work. So I think there's, you know, a lot of the employee practices, you know, if you don't have good employee practices, a lot of these folks that we're talking about are talented, and they'll go other places. And there's a competitive market now where we see folks on a regular basis. If I'm not being treated well, the firm down the street's going to take me.
That saying, so appropriate for the ocean state, the rising tide lifts all boats, right? I mean, if you make your workplace a good workplace, people will come.
Yep.
So it's interesting, Professor Johnson, I think what you were saying also resonates back to Professor Thomas's article where he spoke of this idea of finding these young lawyers or whatever, entry level, whatever the market is, but here we're talking about lawyers, and the model is to assimilate that diversity into the dominant culture versus what he advocated for in 1990, and what I think I hear you saying today is that we need to build a culture that digests unassimilated diversity, right? And so I guess that sounds so beautiful, but I ask, why is it so hard? What is it that, if there's recognition that clients want it, that it's the right thing to do, that we need to look at ourselves, why is it so hard? What can you offer to us to help us build cultures that digest unassimilated diversity?
Is that for me? Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, so why is it so hard? So I actually wrote a book called Inclusify that everyone's going to get who's here at the conference. Oh. And it talks about what the experience of inclusion is. And this is based on a theory that I didn't come up with, but I utilize it. It's based on the feeling of belonging. Like people, we see that belonging. I want to belong, I want to be valued. But to really feel included, you also have to feel that your uniqueness is valued. So inclusion is the overlap of uniqueness and belonging. I can be an essential valued member of the team and still be myself. Okay? That seems, so first I think using that definition of understanding that inclusion is not belonging, it's uniqueness and belonging, can help organizations come up with practices that value that difference, because you know it's not just about assimilation. But the problem is, if you're the dominant culture, you think that the uniqueness part is sort of irrelevant because you're in the dominant culture. So your belonging is your uniqueness, right? Like, of course. And if I work with so many people, and I asked them, think about a time when you felt like your uniqueness wasn't valued, and folks who are from the dominant culture of whatever culture that is in the US and corporate America, you're white and male, hetero, cis, non-disabled, you're like, I don't really understand the question. And so I think it starts with first investing the time and understanding that not everyone's experience is the same, and that people want their differences to be seen. And just letting go of some of the cultural norms that you think are just right. Like, I kind of stereotype lawyers as like wearing lots of suits.
Not me.
I know. But stuff like that, like letting go of this idea of like the way we do things is the way we should do things. That's like whatever the norm is right, and taking a more pluralistic view on the world of the way we do things is the way we do things. And there's probably other ways to do things. I feel like I just sparked something in you.
No, well, everything sparks something in me.
Go for it. Go for it.
I have a story for everything. And so I think one of the things I wanted to share was why I think I'm still at my firm. Why am I still there? I'm probably now the most senior partner of color, and how did that happen? I opened Ballard Spahr's Wilmington, Delaware office at the age of 35 with a 1-year-old on my hip. Don't ask me why I thought that was possible. I think I just, did it. But at the time, I was negotiating with the firm along with a number of other partners from the firm I left, and who all kind of fell off ones and twos, and then it was the bankruptcy group that was going to go over, and it was me and a white male counterpart of mine who's still a dear friend, who at the last minute had a conflict and couldn't make his way, couldn't come to the firm. And so I thought that was it. I thought I wasn't going to Ballard, and that was the end of our lateral partner discussions. Until the chairman called me the next morning and said, so are we going to do this? And I was like, you want just me? You are ready to put the opening of a Wilmington, Delaware office into the hands of a 35-year-old black woman with a 1-year-old? And he said, you were the one we wanted from the beginning. That was the start of 9 years as an office managing partner. Then I was asked by the next chair of the firm to serve on the executive management team. I was for 5 years in charge of all non-partner lawyers, which is just a moniker for saying everybody else who's important. I mean, there was like attorneys, associates of counsel, everything from recruitment to promotions and compensation and the like. And after those 5 years, I was elected by the partnership to the elected board, which is essentially the board of directors of the partnership. I had 200 white men elect me to the elected board for two back-to-back terms. And I just rotated off because the partnership agreement requires it. That's what inclusion is. When you put people in leadership, is that me? When you put people in leadership, and you show them that you're in leadership because you earned it, but because you're a black woman, and you bring a different perspective. And how many times was I the only one in the room? Every time. Every time. And how many times did I rejoice and kind of embrace that principle? Every time. Whether we were talking about the business of the firm, the finances of the firm, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, my voice was there. I shared, and it was heard. So I think having the guts to promote, to give people a chance to grow, to step up, and to do things they haven't done before is such a huge part of inclusion. And will ensure now, there are so many black female associates at my firm that I can't remember all their names, and it kills me. And I have to study the Facebook so that I can say hello to everybody when we go to firm meetings. And that's how I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's wonderful. Judge Trezvant.
I can just add one point that I think when you're talking about retention of employees, I think the one thing that you have to do is, it goes back to your comment about having good employee practices, is to recognize that people are unique and to value their contribution and to pay for their contribution, because if you don't do that, they're going to feel unwanted, and that creates dissension. And I think if you have that process, and a lot of lawyers, they go into a law firm, they want to be compensated, and if you are doing the right thing in terms of your compensation, and you're looking and you're saying, this particular person is doing all this work, and I value that work, you need to recognize that person. You need to recognize that person and say, you know what, you deserve partnership. And you need to publicly acknowledge that and to compensate that and to recognize them as their peers and say, you know what, you do good work. We need to promote you. And I think if you do that and people see that and they hear that process, it will help you with your retention. And if you don't do that, it'll cost you.
And can I jump back in
Yeah,
and
please.
say, this seems so obvious, right? Like, of course you should value difference, but I think it doesn't happen. Like, I feel like in my career, anything I've ever done that is not the mainstream, I'm gonna study leadership, right? People question it. Like my department chair at some job I had said, everyone's talking about the number of Harvard Business Review articles you've written. And I'm like, oh, thank you. And he's like, no, it's not good. They think like, maybe you should publish in more standard journals, not like popular press. That's like more of a popular press that like actually people read. And, and like, people, they're like, well, is that how she should be allocating her time? And I'm like, well, I think so. Or like I wrote a national best-selling book. People are like, that doesn't really count because it's not academic. And I'm like, well, I kind of think that, when maybe if I were more of a majority group member, it would count, or maybe it's still just too weird. But like, the number, hopefully not everyone in the world sees this, but when I left that job, the head of our marketing communications partner said, that's going to be hard that you leave, because for our hits on our website, there's the Stefanie Johnson hits, and then there's everyone else together, and you surpass the rest of the people. And so that's going to be a tough blow to our external recognition. And I'm like, oh yeah, because they think it's not good to do that, to actually bring notoriety to the university. So when people do things that are different, I think sometimes they get the little slap on the wrist, and I just wanted to challenge that. I think it's important to value when people are doing something different, when they're spending time in the community, when they're volunteering, when they're taking high-risk cases or whatever it might be, that just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong.
So what I think you're getting at is one of the things that maybe many of us in the room are familiar with, and that is that changing culture, while it may be a value that we aspire to, is hard work, right? Letting go of norms. And I don't know, Dr. Johnson, you said that you're not necessarily familiar with lawyers, but you think we always like to wear suits. I mean, this is a pretty staid and tradition-bound profession in many ways. And so I think perhaps this idea of change is even harder in the law than it is maybe in other sectors. I look at some of the really great hip companies downtown with all these young people with their relaxed dress codes and their alternate working plans, and I think, yeah, no, those are not the lawyers. So what are some of the practical things that we can do to encourage that change? And especially, I think, for those of us who are trying to do this work and maybe have been trying to do this work, how do we keep from burning ourselves out? How do we manage the fatigue of what is really a big Sisyphean task of changing culture? I love Attorney Daluz's example of essentially hard work, doing it, being yourself every day, and I think that's great, but how do we replicate that in firms in Providence and Newport and Warwick and Cranston? And I actually sort of pivoted off of your point, Professor Johnson, but I welcome thoughts from anybody on the panel.
Well, I'm happy to share just one thought that I have heard a lot in regard to law firms. I think remote work is here to stay. I know a lot of law firms are really resistant to remote work, but there's good data already to show that remote work is particularly attractive for women and women of color and people of color. And so if your firm is like, we're just not going to do that, we're an in-the-office kind of place, then you're risking diversity for that. And also probably Gen Zers and millennials who want to work remotely. And there's going to be firms that are going to do it, and so that's going to be a competitive advantage for them that you're missing out on. I think there's many more practical ideas, but I have to comment on the other question that you asked, Justice, of what do we do when we get tired? And I think that's like, I think everyone on this panel can speak to that, but two thoughts. One, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first, like take care of yourself before you can take care of everyone else. And two, like you need support systems in the office, out of the office, other people who are doing this type of work just to have conversations with and share this thing happened, and them not say like, I don't really get why that's an issue, but them just be like, yes, I know, I hear you, I see you. And so finding those people, if you don't have them, find them here today and tomorrow, because you're going to need them. I think everyone needs those colleagues and peers to have these conversations with, or it's like, I think the burnout is huge, and so I think you just need that social support.
I have 2 points to make. One is personal, which is after all those years of leadership and rotating off the board, I was like so excited. I am living in a vacuum now. I don't have any more responsibilities and firm leadership, and I'm like, this is great. I just get to practice law. And I've felt that burnout, and I see it. And it stems back to the original question, which is, how did you get involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? And the expectation from many in law firm or leadership that DEI will be carried by the people of color and LGBTQIA+ in law firms. And it's unfair. And it's exhausting. And it's in addition to our billable work. And we're expected to do both. And if you are a person of color, for example, who is less inclined to put in the extra time or unable to, for whatever personal reasons you may have, you're questioned. Like, are they really about DEI? Are they really about the movement? Are they all just about themselves? And I think what we've seen, at least in my firm, and hopefully this is true of the legal industry as a whole, is the growth of allyship in bringing in our majority, I'm not going to call them majority, let's just call people what they are, white male counterparts into the discussion and ask them to carry this weight with us. It's a lot of work. And if clients expect it, then why is it only our job? And I hear younger associates say that all the time now, that how do I meet my billable hours if I'm expected to go to these dinners and these functions and the conferences? But I'm seeing white men come to the table now who put them in some leadership roles to head up some, the work-life balance group or the global perspectives group for, we have a multicultural business advisory group. We have white lawyers in the Black attorney resource group. You don't It's easy. It's easy to lean in. And we need more people to do so.
Thank you, Judge Trezvant. I do want to leave time for questions. So I think this is brilliant because we're talking about like the positive allies. It's like a positive way to sort of segue. So I'm going to let Judge Trezvant do that, and then maybe we'll take some questions.
I'll do very brief, Judge. I believe that one of the things that I find now is very important is to develop your support system, is to go out to people and look at them as your allies, but also give them an assignment. Have them ask them, I need you to do X by such and such a time, and give them a task. You know, for example, I would tell folks, you know, we need to send out that job inquiry and let people know, and you need to send out that inquiry for me because I can't do that. I can't do everything. And I find that that also brings new people to the table and gives them a job to do that they can share that burden with you, that you're not all by yourself, that other folks can sit there and say, you know what, I can do that. I can send out the you know, and get those resumes to that particular person because, you might have a situation where you're on trial and you're busy and you really can't pay attention to that particular role, and that job posting may have a deadline, so it needs to get out. So you could, I think it's very, very important for your own sanity to put your oxygen mask on and develop those support systems so that you could be in the game for a long time.
I think that's great. I think I want to share this anecdote from last week. I had the great privilege of being able to attend a lecture at RISD of a RISD alum, this amazing sculptor who grew up on a pueblo in northern New Mexico, and she came back to RISD. She's doing fantastic work. Her work is really being recognized, and she gave this powerful presentation about her art. And at the end, she took questions, and she got a question from the audience about allies. What do you need from allies? The person asked. And this brilliant artist stood up there and said, I need you to look inside of yourself at that uncomfortable, hard, painful part of us that exists in all of us. I need you to look into that and view the world from that place, because that is our humanity, and that brings us together. And I just thought it was so powerful, and I thought, oh my God, lawyers never say things like this. But it's so true. And so I so appreciate, we're up here talking about the importance of allies, and I think we're in a room of allies now, and we're all lawyers, and we might not necessarily be looking into ourselves at that painful part, but I think that that's what we're all asking of one another, is to recognize our humanity. And for those of us who are doing this work, to really be with us, bear this with us. And so I so appreciate it. Like I said, I'm the moderator. I'm not supposed to be sharing stories, but this artist was amazing, and I had to share that. So I do want to, we've had such great content. So questions, comments. I think that we have someone in the back with a microphone. I will call on my law clerks and put them on the spot if you make me.
Oh, that's cruel.
But I'm sure that they would rather hear from some of you first. Anybody?
Try to stump the panel.
Thank you all so very much for your words this morning. You talked about mentorship, and I do think there might be a few folks who identify as white who might feel like they're not adequate to be mentors to people of color, who maybe they feel like they can't connect, or they can't really dive deep into some of these issues that we've all talked about this morning. And so they might self-exclude themselves from mentoring young folks. I know for me, I'm from Rhode Island. It's a pretty Caucasian state. And so I'm happy to say most of my mentors in the legal world identify as white. And I'm so grateful for all of them. And actually, a few of them are in this room right now, too. So, but what do you say to the partners, managing partners, leaders in law firms who identify as white, but are hesitant to mentor young people of color?
I say that I mentor white men and I can't connect with them. I think, and it breaks the ice, and hopefully they laugh, and we move on to a discussion around what it means to mentor. There's already a recognition that there's a kind of an age gap. You're the mentor, and you're going to be hopefully older and wiser and be able to impart that wisdom on someone who has less experience than you. You don't have to be from the same background and the same culture in order to impart that wisdom. And people need mentors from all different backgrounds. I mentor a junior white partner because we're both bankruptcy lawyers, and that's where we connect. And I help him to navigate the firm socially because he doesn't get it. Okay? That's where I provide a strength to him. But I mentor so many other people for different reasons. Don't feel like a mentor means that that's your only mentor. You mentor people for a host of reasons. And I think also you have to be clear that sometimes it's good for you just to be a sponsor. What does that mean? Well, I'm not necessarily helping you to navigate your career other than to make sure you get a steady supply of excellent, sophisticated work. And I am training you, and I am making sure that you are growing as a lawyer. That's a fine role to play too. Just don't shy away from people who don't look like you or don't have the same background. That's almost ties into the comment from the artist at RISD. That's where lawyers can look to their humanity.
I can add one point to that. I think the other thing that you brought out in your comments, and they're excellent comments, is you're going to have more than one mentor. You're going to have more than one person that has a specific role in your life at a particular time. And that's very important to recognize that. And you'll meet someone who will look at you and ask and say, you have a great resume, but it's upside down. It's chronologically, it should be job-oriented to communicate the fact that you're doing great work. You went to a great law school, but you're now a partner in the firm. You need to lead off with the fact that you're a partner. And so at different times, you're going to have different mentors who provide different insight into it, and be able to really look at you and say, you know what, you're good, but this is off. And this is off, and this is critical for you to now deal with the fact that you might be soft-spoken, you might have this particular flaw, and you need to work on that. And that's what we need to work on. And we need to focus on that at this particular time. So don't think of a mentor just as one person, but you'll have several different people, I think, and be open to that. And you're going to interact with different people, and I think that's a challenge, but I would tell folks, step up to the challenge.
Yeah, I would definitely echo both of those, or all of the things that you said. I think that's exactly right. You need to have a board of directors of mentors, so they should be diverse, because if you believe in the power of diversity, then your board of directors should be diverse to give you different insights. I think the sponsorship, there's another horrible, awful study, just like my 2016 study, that showed that having sponsors who were majority group members they used the term legitimacy signals. So to be a Mexican woman, if I were recommended for a job by another Mexican woman, people would be like, well, they're probably friends, but actually when you're recommended by a majority group member, it creates legitimacy, which really ticks me off. But it does highlight the importance of having diverse mentors and those sponsors in the room who are willing to back you with their name, and they're in rooms that maybe you're not, or your other mentors aren't in those rooms. So I think that's huge. And then I would also say, like, there is a reciprocal benefit to mentoring someone who has a different background than your own. So the study, it was done at Sun Microsystems a long time ago, before it was Oracle, so that's how long ago. And they paired, male senior mentors with junior female mentees, and they found both the mentors and the mentees were more likely to get promoted. It was like 5 times more likely for the mentors than average, 6 times more likely for the mentees. And they both got pay raises, big pay raises. So like what? Both people benefit. It's called reciprocal mentoring. Interacting with someone who's different than you also benefits you. So it's like a win-win. I guess I feel like, why would we not do this? And again, just for my own personal, if I only had Mexican or women business professor mentors, I don't know that I would really have very many, like just because of the base rate of, and I think it's true in the legal profession as well, there's just not enough to go around. And so I think, especially if everyone has a board of directors, we obviously, like I will go on record to say for any white or male mentor who thinks that they can't do a good enough job, like, yes, you can, like just showing up, and you'll learn stuff along the way. And guess what? After you do it once, and the next time you'll be even better at doing it.
Have you formulated your thoughts yet? Are you ready?
Yes.
Excellent. Here comes the mic.
Hello. So my question relates to some comments about how advocating for oneself and DEI initiatives can have a burden on the person who is diverse. And I think my question probably is mostly directed to Attorney Daluz. What have you seen in the law firm context in terms of recognition of like the mental health consequences of either carrying that burden of having to advocate, or even just being a diverse person in a completely new or alienating perhaps environment?
There's a lot packed into that question. No, that's okay. That's okay. I think kind of first off, if you feel as though you are isolated in your work environment, that you are among only a small number of those who are repeatedly asked to move forward the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at your firm. And it does become burdensome. The legal industry has responded in several ways, and we talked about some of them already, which is providing, billable hour credits, providing bonuses, at the partner level, discussing even recognizing those partners in your allocation system, whatever that is, requiring partners to do we call it the walk on water memo, to do their allocation memo, and every partner has to say what they've done to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Every associate in their self-evaluation memo every year has to answer a question about what they've done to advance the firm's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And tying in those answers to real recognizable changes in compensation. Of course, that's where the rubber meets the road. Those, I think, are the ways we can help remove some of that burden and that isolation. The mental health effects are enormous, okay? And law firms now are only now, I think it's in a post-pandemic environment, really recognizing how the mental health of lawyers and how we have not focused and concentrated on our own mental health. And it was viewed, I think, in a profession like ours as a sign of weakness. But disproportionately, we have so many who may turn to either, alcoholism or they're depressed. And I think that finding either through it could be as simple as, not simple, but, your health insurance. My firm now has programs around, mental health needs and support. You can go to the chief diversity officer of my firm and talk about that isolation, or you can go to the head of HR and get partnered with a mental health professional to talk about them. But I think the other thing is, we touched about this already, everybody needs a support system, and I have my own too, and we call ourselves the FPOC. And it is the 5 female partners of color at big law firms in Wilmington. And I'll say it again, 5. Okay? So I may not have come back to Providence, but quite often I sit in my office in Wilmington, where clearly I went to become a bankruptcy lawyer and do the sophisticated work that comes to Wilmington, Delaware. And I look out and I say, how the heck did I end up here? Because Providence is more cosmopolitan than this city. But the 5 of us get together, as we will on Sunday night for dinner, and we support one another because we know what it's like to navigate at our level of seniority a majority law firm, and the support that we need and gain from one another in our professional lives and in our personal lives as we navigate. We're in the age group where we're caring for aging parents and also, kind of supporting college age and young adult children. And so that's critical for everybody. And whether you are a leader in a law firm, a leader in a government agency, or a first-year associate, you absolutely need that support system. And it's helpful if it's someone who understands the burning sands that you're walking across.
You know what I love about that in particular is that, and maybe this is a stereotype, and I apologize to all the white men if I'm exhibiting a bias, but to me that is a uniquely strong Black woman response to that, and that is the recognition of the power that comes from one another. So I just felt like I had to say that, and I appreciate that. Do I have other questions? Ooh, yes, so the microphone is coming.
Hi, thank you for such a wonderful panel. I'd like to ask this question from the perspective of a relatively small organization. Rhode Island's a pretty small state. A large law firm in Rhode Island, I don't know how big the largest one is, maybe 100 lawyers, but a typical law firm in Rhode Island, a large law firm would be about 10 to 15 lawyers. Where I practice, I think we have 9 or 10. We have made an effort, I'd say over the last 5 years, to really focus on diverse hiring. When we send out advertisements to Rhode Island Lawyers Weekly or traditional channels, we typically get very few applicants in general, but also very few diverse applicants. So I'd be curious to hear if you have any specific ideas about how we could just try to draw from a larger pool to try to get more applicants. And the other thing I'd say is that I think in a small organization, we really have less resources to devote to tasks in general. It's just kind of more smorgasbord in areas in general. So we typically, I think most firms, I can only speak for my firm, but I would imagine most firms in Rhode Island don't have large committees, and we don't have necessarily the resources, the financial resources to devote things. One thing that I really like was the idea of bringing someone in at a partner level. I can tell you what I was thinking was I would love to say that at a partner meeting. If I said that, what that would mean is that every partner is probably taking a 15 to 20% income hit if we just brought someone in who brought in no business. So with those kinds of things in mind, I'd be curious to hear some ideas from the perspective of a small organization that firms can do.
Judge Trezvant.
I appreciate the fact that in Rhode Island we do have some smaller firms as opposed to the bigger 1,000-person firms and what have you. I think that there's some definite steps that smaller firms can take. One is to look at your recruitment both as I call it an orthodox way and an unorthodox way. and to look at, if you're not getting the applicants, to also look and reach out to not only the Thurgood Marshall Law Society, but also the Hispanic Bar Association, which is a fast-growing organization. Also reach out to groups like the NAACP and other groups like the Rhode Island Black Business Association. These are groups that have recently made some headway into reaching out to different professionals. A lot of professionals are part of the Rhode Island Black Business Association. And you'll find that at different times there are, in a traditional law school perspective, we used to do resume drops, and that was all we used to do. Well, they've now changed their business practices because that wasn't working. So to really identify what is the criteria you're looking for, and to look out and reach out to non-traditional ways is an important part, I think, of a diversity initiative, because, to look at and say, who is the head of the group, who is part of the NAACP. I can tell an interesting story where the current Attorney General reached out to the local NAACP in Newport and said, do you have any diverse candidates? And they got one from the Newport NAACP, which is a smaller organization. It's probably less than 20 people as part of that organization. They found a young woman now who's an assistant attorney general with that group, and she's doing great work, and I expect her to do very, very well. So there are ways to look at that, and I think that's just one small way to look at how you do your recruitment, because if it hasn't been working the ways you have to look at that and change it.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, I want to get to our last question, too.
Okay, I am in a big firm. It's over 600 lawyers in a small town. There is no law firm. There are maybe 2 law firms in Wilmington that have 100 people. 50 is a big office. Respectable is 20, and the Ballard office in Delaware is 20 people. I can share with you some of the things that we have done in Delaware to try to diversify the bar, but I will tell you it takes everyone. It takes the judiciary, who has externships and internships, and they bring in diverse law school graduates, and those people get jobs in Delaware. It takes the Minority Job Fair, which is put on by the entire bar, the Delaware State Bar Association. Every law firm is expected and shunned if they don't participate. And you spend one Saturday in the fall meeting law students from across the country who are willing to fly in to potentially get jobs in your city. It's going to take thinking outside the box. Again, one of those 1L programs. If you traditionally hire a 2L, hire a 1L. Ask your largest client, who has an in-house legal department, if they would be willing to share the summer with you. That attracts a diverse law student into taking your position, as opposed to a position maybe at a bigger firm, because they get both experiences. And then again, the same thing, you look in different places when it comes time for laterals, and the way to do that is to work with the minority bar associations in Delaware. The Barristers Association does that. If you know the leadership of those organizations, then you send out, our firm is looking for a mid-level associate who's interested in all of these amazing things that we do at our firm, and send it to those are the examples that Judge Trezvant was giving you. There are less time-consuming ways, and other ways that should be shared across I think the entire legal industry in Rhode Island.
I have to give a really fast yes, and work your network. So you're here at a meeting, reach out, make some connections, so when you do have an opening, I'm going to guess if I have an opening, what I do is what everyone does. I email the people I know. Hey, we're looking for this person. We're looking for someone to do this job. If your network is pretty homogenous, which statistically everyone's is, then you need to diversify your network. And this is a great setting to do that. But I think your point is right, that it's everyone's responsibility, and so work your network.
One last question. I think there was a hand from before.
Good morning. My name is Sasha. I'm a current 3L at Roger Williams. Most of my externship is spent at the courthouse every day. And since I started, maybe at least 2 to 3 times a week, I'm mistaken as an interpreter or a social worker. And they never make the mistake and think I'm an attorney. So I find myself getting angry. So I also see some of my peers in here who are also students at Roger Williams. I worry that they're discouraged from the community if that might happen to them. So if you can give us some advice how to navigate through this legal profession without getting angry and still keeping it professional.
Girl, take my number. It's not just Rhode Island. Don't blame it on that courthouse or that city. We didn't talk about unconscious bias today, but frankly, lawyers are only now learning about unconscious bias and how to not make those kinds of mistakes. And I will be honest with you, they will continue. And often it's not the lawyers that are mistaking us. It's those who support the lawyers. So for those of you who have clerks or assistants or people who run your administration, they also need to be thoughtful and more inclusive. And because the people who make the mistake about whether I'm the paralegal, yeah, I still get that. I still get it. I'm not mad anymore. I just embarrass them and move on. You'll come up with a few good lines that will carry you through your career. And everybody has, it's not just us. It's not just people of color. Sometimes it's because people look young or because you're a petite blonde. There could be a whole bunch of reasons why people are thought to be different than who they are. So don't get angry, but I'll help you come up with a few good lines if you want.
I think, am I getting the hook? So thank you so much. This has been fabulous and really, really appreciate your time and attention.